just as growing up as an American Jewish woman, and granted, you were politically aware, and you were politicized, and all of that, but it's not an obvious step, even with what you described as your politicization and your experiences. It's still not an obvious step to feel solidarity, to want to express solidarity with Palestinians.
Right.
You know, by and large, American Jewish community is nowhere near there, even the ones who are very political and progressive. What was it?
I think it was a mixture. I think as a U.S. citizen who's funding this, and as a Jewish American who has this crazy state that says it speaks for the Jews, I felt very responsible. So I felt like I can't turn my back on this. And it became more of a passion for me because I felt so part of the I felt like I was coming from part of the problem. And so I had to do what I could do to fix whatever I could fix, or to alert people to what's going on, or to use my, white privilege to get people to see what's happening. So, besides doing some medical work, I did a lot of interviews, like with groups like Stop the Wall, and the group in Hebron with Isa Amru, and we made the rounds of every
so that's just medicine. This is now just
human rights. So it was health and human rights. So there was a big human rights focus. Yeah. And then we started making human connections. So we'd stay with families. We'd stay in refugee camps. I went to Gaza 3 times.
You talk about, hold on, let's talk about going to Gaza for a minute.
Yeah.
So the first time you went to Gaza was when?
I think it was probably 2005, because Iyad al-Sarraj was still alive.
2005 was also the so-called disengagement, where the Israeli government pulled out all the settlers and locked up Gaza.
Right. That was my first experience of what does the consequence of war look like? What does it look like to stand in the sea of miles of rubble and see children's toys and broken cups and little kids' books? And
where was all this? Where did you see all this?
It's the buffer zone between Egypt.
Just throw.
Yeah. And so that was the first time I kind of got a glimpse of life.
And we were
hosted by the Gaza Community Mental Health Program. We did a lot of bearing witness. And we
to what?
To what the realities of life were, like going to the buffer zone and talking to people who were still hanging on the edges of the buffer.
Medical stuff.
It was all mental health stuff. And so because we were hosted by a psychiatric group, mental health group, some people saw patients with them. Sometimes we talked with staff. We saw what their facilities were like. And, we talked with people like from OCHA and other human rightsy kind of places. I was talking to people who were so principled and so resilient about what they were doing and so determined.
What do you mean principled?
Well, here I was, a Jewish American, and we were able to connect as people who respected human rights, as, I was someone who wanted to let the outside world know what their reality was, and people were very eager to talk.
And they knew that you were Jewish?
And they knew I was always publicly Jewish. No, it did matter to me. I wanted, I kept meeting people who'd never met a Jew who wasn't a soldier. And so one of the things I was doing was just having that experience with people to see, there is a Jewish person standing here who doesn't want to take anything from you, who doesn't want to kill you, who doesn't want to hurt you. What's that like? So we had these amazing, intense moments, because it was just, that was the reality. It was also, incredibly traumatized, secondary trauma for me. Every time I go to Gaza, I come back and it takes me months to recover, because it's such an oppressed place. And it's like, this is optional. People don't have to live this way. This is because of the policies of the Israeli government. And, my government's paying for this. And, you pick up a canister and it has USA written on. I mean, it's not a subtle finding. So this all led to a deeper and deeper engagement, more and more connections, more human connections. The group I was working with in Boston morphed into different, political groups, but we set up an exchange program between Al-Quds University Medical School and Harvard. And so then we started hosting Palestine.
When was this?
When did we set that up?
That's a big deal.
That's a big deal. I don't know, maybe 2010. Something in that ballpark.
Yeah, just
so my house became one of the few houses in Boston that had Palestinian medical students staying, and sometimes we'd have one, and sometimes we'd have five, and there were a couple of other people who hosted them, and then I got to know all these young people.
So they went to Harvard Medical School, or
they
went
did
for
they did it on like a 6-week rotation through Harvard Medical School, through a Harvard hospital, and guess what? Their English was impeccable. They were beautifully educated. They could keep up with the Harvard students without any trouble. They were brilliant. Yeah, it's like, come on. So then I had this intense connection with each of these students. And then, the next time I'd go, I'd have to go visit their families, and then I'd get to know more. But, one thing built on another. So that became part of the way of talking about this, was to talk about healthcare and human rights, because whether you're a Zionist or not, it's not okay for women to deliver at a checkpoint and bleed to death. That's like not okay in anybody's book. So it was like a vehicle to be able to talk about this. And the way that I dealt with the level of sort of secondary trauma that I was having being there was to write. So I started just writing like crazy. I did not go to sleep at night.
When did you start writing?
I think from the start, but I got much more compulsive about, I did not go to bed without having a complete writing of what happened that day.
So every day while you were there?
Yeah. I was famous for someone who didn't sleep. I didn't sleep. People would be all asleep and I'd be in the stairway writing. At first I did it on tape, and then I was like, that's ridiculous, because then I have to transcribe it all. So
the reason I ask is because my process, I can never write when I'm in it. I can only write once I'm back.
Yeah, no.
And then I open the door and
yeah.
it all
no,
comes
no,
out.
I have to do it
never write when I'm
day
there.
by day.
You've written books, you've made a movie, you're active on Palestine, you're a feminist, you're really an incredible person with a lot to say and a lot to offer. So I really appreciate your time in doing this interview. I want to mention your website, alicerothchild.com and alicerothchildbooks.com. So you're not part of the Rothschild clan, the famous Rothschild clan. Let's get that out of the way. And maybe start by telling me about you a little bit, your background and who you are.
So I grew up during the Vietnam War and the Civil Rights Movement, and so I was aware of what was going on. And I did my medical training. Probably the most important year was at Lincoln Hospital in the South Bronx, where I got very radicalized by what I saw in terms of the inequities in healthcare and dealing with poor people and people who were amazingly resilient and had no resources whatsoever. And so I got more and more radical as this went on. And when I went into obstetrics and gynecology, that's an experience that will make any sensible woman a feminist. I went to medical school because I wanted to help people. Right. I didn't have a political framework. Right. So then I discovered the realities of the healthcare system and the realities of a profit-making system. And I discovered other kinds of healthcare systems. And so I got much more political in how I approached the healthcare as a system of providing care for people. And I also got involved with the folks who were writing Our Bodies, Ourselves, which became the sort of feminist Bible of of women's movement in the United States. And I was one of the students who was reading the text and making sure it was medically correct and that kind of thing. So that whole exposure really changed me as well. I started living in a commune. I mean, I did all these sort of 60s, 70s things that moved me to the left and made me much more aware of how women are disempowered in the system and how to make that change.
You said you visited Israel when you were young with your family. Your family was Zionist. Mm-hmm. You lived in the commune. You never went to a kibbutz, though. You never went to Israel to experience the kibbutz.
No, my family visited a kibbutz when we were there.
But that wasn't part of your experience.
No,
you didn't think you wanted to go.
No.
Was there a reason why you didn't, or you just didn't? Was it a conscious thing?
When I was 6 years old, I said, I'm going to be a psychiatrist. I have no idea why I knew about psychiatry.
Right.
So I was very goal-oriented. I wrote a paper on schizophrenia in 9th grade. I majored in psychology in college. I went right to medical school. I didn't stop training until I was like in my 30s. So I never took a gap year. I was a little laser beam kind of person, perfect medical student.
Right. And then the place where our lives merge is Palestine. Mm-hmm. And being Jews who are outspoken about the Palestine issue. But you have a niche within that. You're very specific in what you do with that. And it's unique. So can you talk about why you got started with it, how you got started and became aware?
So, as a lefty kind of person with an increasing understanding of colonialism and imperialism and World War II and history and all those kind of things, I grew increasingly uncomfortable about Israel. I didn't know enough about what was wrong, but I knew something was wrong.
What made you uncomfortable initially?
I'm not 100% sure. I think it was something about having a Jewish state was uncomfortable to me, but I didn't have the knowledge base and the analysis to really understand what the problem was, but I knew there was a problem. And then as Israel was approaching its 50th anniversary, I got together with a group of people in Boston with the Workers' Circle, Kahil Beira, New Jewish Agenda, and we started talking about what was going on. And we actually participated in the Israeli 50th anniversary. We had a peace forum with a Palestinian and a lefty rabbi and a radical Israeli. And we started getting more knowledgeable and more active. My main education was listening to Palestinians tell their stories, and we just did that over and over again. And we got a very quick, I started reading the new Israeli historians and doing what you have to do to get knowledgeable. And then what happened was that we thought, my God, people need to know about this. We need to start doing programs and things in synagogues and libraries. And we had no idea what was going to happen to us. And shortly after that, we got really blacklisted in the Boston area.
Who's we again?
This little grassroots organization, Visions of Peace with Justice in Israel-Palestine. And then we were sort of struggling, well, if we can't get beyond this teeny-weeny choir, what can we do? And one of the people in the group was also, there were a number of physicians, and he said he'd worked on stuff in El Salvador using medicine and human rights as a way to understand El Salvador. Maybe we could do that in Israel-Palestine. So we started in 2003 organizing health and human rights delegations to the region. We started small. We coalitioned with Physicians for Human Rights Israel and Palestinian Medical Relief Society. And then we started going over year after year after year.
Where did you go?
We did this for like almost 15 years. We went all over the place. So at the beginning, I was interested in going into Israeli hospitals because I was trying to figure out how do these doctors work in this context and what kind of social consciousness do they have. And that got old very quickly.
What do you mean?
Well, I got to understand what the blindness was and what the strengths of their system was, and it became less interesting to me because I wanted to know how were Palestinians surviving and what kind of institutions they had.
You mean like the West Bank and Gaza as opposed to...
Yeah. And I'll just tell you a little interesting vignette. My department head had worked in Israel and was a big Zionist. He was one of the kind of people who would take delegations of American doctors to visit the terrorism response in Israel and that kind of thing. So the first time I was going to go, I went to him and I said, I'm going to go and I'd really like to talk to Israeli doctors. And we had this very civil conversation. And then I said, could you give me the name of some of your colleagues? And he said, no. And it was like he had slapped me across the face. And I said, why? And he said, because you are a danger to the Jewish people. Anyway, so, I got quite an education going into the West Bank, working in clinics.
Can we learn something from this?
Jews are very invested in their victimhood, their story of being the big victim with the Holocaust, and that for Jewish people to admit that there was, that the price of founding the State of Israel was the ethnic cleansing of Palestinians is so painful and so out of their imagination that they can't bear to go there. And also, because no one wants to be the bad guy. No one, and Jews, my mother used to say, Jews are moral people, they don't rape, they don't steal, they only take what's theirs. Jews are decent people. And everybody wants to be that decent person. And I understand that. We all want to be that. I do this because I want to be a decent person. But once you make that connection, then you have to be in a place of apology and reparations and recompense and mending the ills. And people don't want to go there. And I understand why they don't want to go there.
So how did you end up going there?
I don't know. I don't know.